Let's talk about the world's biggest election. It's happening in India. 970 million voters, more than 2,600 political parties, and one likely outcome. 5 more years of Prime Minister Modi.
It is safe to assume that Narendra Modi is headed for a third term.
Modi's approval rating makes him the most popular leader in the world right now.
Well, we have Bollywood stars in India. Modi has probably surpassed them in terms of popularity.
He gets a lot of credit for India's booming economy and its growing status on the world stage. But some people are worried about the direction the country is going in. They say Modi and his party are changing India's democracy into a more authoritarian state, one that prioritizes India's majority Hindu population and threatens minorities, especially Muslims.
So there's no doubt that Modi's government has attacked some of the key features of India's democratic setup.
The fear is that the democracy in our country is slowly slipping.
So here are 5 things to know to help you understand what's going on in India and why this election is such a big deal. The first thing to get your head around is the sheer scale of holding an election in a country of 1.4 billion people. The number of registered voters in India is more than all the voters in these 7 countries, which also have elections this year. It'll take 15 million election workers, more than 1 million polling stations, and it's happening in 7 phases from April to June, with different parts of the country voting at different times.
It's always a grand democratic exercise, and you have every year stories of folks taking up electoral voting machines to tiny places where there's only 3 or 4 people voting, but they make the effort to cross rivers and climb hills to get there.
Now, India is a parliamentary system, like the UK, for example. People will be voting for candidates to represent them in the lower house of parliament. There are 543 seats, and the political party or alliance that gets a majority forms a government and chooses the prime minister. The next thing you need to know is who's up against who. There are thousands of parties running, but here are the key players. There's the ruling BJP, that's Modi's party. It leads a political alliance of several other parties, but has been able to get a majority on its own in the last 2 elections. This time, Modi has set a target for an even bigger win. He wants 370 seats for the BJP alone and 400 with his allies. On the opposition side, you've got the Congress party. It dominated Indian politics for decades, but these days it's much weaker, and it's linked up with a bunch of other parties to take on the BJP as the India Alliance.
The fight is not between 2 political formations. The fight is a fight to defend the idea of India. And that is why we came up with the name.
That's Rahul Gandhi. He's seen as the leader of the Congress party, and he's from India's most famous political dynasty. His father, grandmother, and great-grandfather were all prime ministers. Now, Rahul Gandhi might be the face of Congress, but he's not the official leader of the India Alliance. It's not yet clear who that is.
The India Alliance has got entangled in leadership issues, squabbles over programs, squabbles over agenda, and it hasn't really gained traction.
Contrast that with the BJP and Modi, who's both really popular and powerful. Let's run through some reasons that explain his appeal. Modi's from a pretty modest background, not a political dynasty. He projects himself as a decisive leader who gets things done, a break from the coalition governments that came before him when there was a lot of infighting and corruption scandals.
In a certain way, he conveys an image of integrity, probity, and transparency.
India's economy is also doing really well right now. It's the fastest growing major economy in the world.
At a time when the global economy is still struggling, India clearly has a better record under Modi in the last few years.
Quick disclaimer, not everyone in India is necessarily feeling the benefits. Young people especially are struggling to find jobs. Rahul Gandhi's made that a big part of his campaign, and thousands of farmers have been protesting because they can't make a decent living.
Modi Sarkar Murdabad!
But Modi also talks about how his policies have lifted millions out of poverty.
25 करोड़ लोग गरीबी से बाहर आए हैं.
Under one government program, 800 million people receive a free ration of grain every month, and there's no doubt who it's coming from. Many people also approve of the way Modi has raised India's profile internationally through things like hosting the G20 summit and international tours where he's often received like a rock star.
Well, the last time I saw someone on the stage here was Bruce Springsteen, and he didn't get the welcome that Prime Minister Modi has got.
Modi's also positioning India as a space power.
India has become the first country in the world to successfully land a craft near the moon's south pole.
India is on the moon.
It becomes another element in the broader idea that under Modi, India is rising, India is growing.
He's popular because he's macho, he talks business. That muscular image is very important, and it seems to go down well with a lot of Indians.
Now, there's another key part of Modi and the BJP's appeal, and it really deserves its own section, and that's Hindutva, a political ideology that promotes Hinduism as the dominant political and cultural force in India. Hindus make up 80% of India's population. The next biggest group is Muslims, and there are also significant numbers of Christians and Sikhs. They're all considered minority communities, but we're talking about millions of people. Now, when India became independent in 1947, it was established as a secular democracy, so the state is not meant to favor any one religion. But many accuse Modi and the BJP of trying to change that by pushing policies that favor the Hindu majority.
Hindutva is broadly the ideology of the BJP, and it's based on the sense that India ought to be a land run by and for the Hindus, while minorities may still be a part of this fabric. It is one that imagines a Hindu state in the way that Pakistan is, for example, a state for Muslims.
It is very important to make a distinction between Hinduism and Hindutva. You have practicing Hindus who go to temples, practice rituals, but they don't necessarily subscribe to the BJP's ideology, which is underpinned on political Hindutva.
People point to many examples of the government platforming Hinduism in a very public way, like the opening of the Ayodhya temple. Hindus believe the site was the birthplace of one of their most prominent gods, Ram. But a mosque stood there for hundreds of years, until 1992, when Hindu mobs tore it down.
That led to nationwide communal riots that killed at least 2,000 people, mostly Muslims.
For years afterwards, it was a subject of a bitter land dispute over who the land actually belongs to. But now the temple is in place.
And in January, Modi led the opening ceremony, delivering on what had been a core pledge of the BJP for years.
The BJP sees it as a milestone in its history.
Being present at very clearly religious events and platforming those as being definitive about India is quite new and a big part of Modi's appeal.
But it's a big part of the criticism too. And that brings us to our last point, why some people are fearful about the direction that India is going in under Modi's leadership. Let's start with the media. The government and its supporters are accused of controlling the messaging in traditional media and online, squeezing out critical voices. Reporters Without Borders says violence against journalists, the politically partisan media, and the concentration of media ownership all demonstrate that press freedom is in crisis.
The mainstream media has been completely co-opted by the government. In fact, rarely do you see a report which calls the government to account.
If you open any TV channel or a newspaper, there's only Mr. Narendra Modi.
But it's not just the media. There are also accusations that the government is using or misusing its power to target activists and opposition politicians.
You have the sense that the investigative agencies run by the central government have been used as a political tool against those who are critical.
Another major criticism of Modi and the BJP is that their policies have created an atmosphere that's enabled discrimination and violence against minorities, especially Muslims.
That's been one of the glaring features of the last 10 years, and it's just becoming worse by the day.
Muslims have been targeted by Hindu mobs under all sorts of pretexts, and videos of attacks are often shared online. mosques have been set on fire, and Muslim businesses have been bulldozed. Against that backdrop of rising violence, a controversial new law has also been making headlines. The law fast-tracks citizenship for immigrants of certain religions, but not Muslims. There have been protests about it, and critics say it goes against India's secular constitution.
This is the first time that into the principle of citizenship, you are finding a law being brought in that actually discriminates by excluding people of one particular faith.
Now, the government rejects this. It says the law is about protecting persecuted religious minorities from neighboring countries and that Muslims don't fall into that category. Modi's also brushed off accusations that there's any wider pattern of discrimination in India.
In India's democratic values, there is absolutely no discrimination, neither on basis of caste, creed, or age, or any kind of geographic location.
Modi's message is one that resonates with a lot of people in India. He's going into this election with a really strong position, with the power of the state behind him, and few people expect the weak and divided opposition alliance to overcome that. So people aren't really talking about whether Modi will win, but by how much. We do explainers about lots of different news topics. Check out our recent episode about what's going on in the war in Ukraine.